Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for coming to Spotlight on Editors of Color, Part 2. My name is Ebonye Gussine Wilkins. I am the founder and principal consultant of Inclusive Media Solutions, LLC. I'm a social justice writer and editor, and I focus on meaningful inclusion. Our wonderful, wonderful guest today, who we are so thrilled to have, is Kelly Glass, an award winning editor and the founder of the VP Chicago. Let's welcome Kelly. Yay! So, Kelly, my first question for you is how did you get here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I took the long, windy route. I studied journalism in college, which doesn't sound very non-traditional, but um, of course, I always had the intentions of becoming an editor, but I could not afford to take, the unpaid journalism internship. Um, I got into the top schools in my state, but I couldn't afford to go. So my sort of the beginning of my career is marked by like always this need to pivot, right? So I interviewed at newspapers up and down the state. I couldn't get hired, even as someone who was the editor of the university newspaper. So I pivoted and I went into different types of editing. I was an editor at a academic publishing company. I was an editor for a brand, and I did all of that while always doing journalism on the side. And then the summer of 2020 unfortunately happened, and it was really an opportunity for me to take all of the things that I had been working towards and working on in my kind of like on the side hustle freelance career. And I took it and I went freelance full time. I had been building my community around like-minded journalists and editors without really expecting much in return, just kind of offering what I can, right? And asking for help when I needed it. And building those communities is what really jump started my full-time freelance career. People were saying my names in rooms that I didn't even know they were. People were coming to me offering, do you want to work on this project because we saw you did this or we heard from this person. So I just really emphasized how valuable that was. And then, of course, when the industry changed again, and kind of the moment we are now, where there seems to be a lack of care for Black perspectives once again in journalism, I pivoted again, and right now I'm in probably the biggest pivot of my career.
That's really, really interesting. And I'm sorry that you had to pivot so much, but there is an element of resiliency to pivoting, but
Absolutely.
I think the reasons for pivoting are kind of a systemic problem. You know what I mean? But you said a few
I agree.
things that I absolutely love and I absolutely agree with. Like, community is such a big thing, and it is so difficult to not only find that community, but to rally people up. So
Yeah.
it's not like Black editors aren't out there. It's not like editors of color aren't out there. We're here. We've always been here. And so community is what we're going to need to be able to stick together and elevate each other and, pass along work. That's not the
Absolutely.
sole reason for community. It can't always be about dollar signs, but I understand that people, you have to do what you have to do to keep the lights on, you know? I also love what you said about people speaking your name in rooms that you're not in. That is a huge thing for me. People have done that for me. I have done that for people. It's sort of, I wouldn't call it symbiotic, but it's kind of that lifting as you climb. You don't want to
Right.
be by yourself at the top because the top is lonely, and especially with so many systemic issues and, white supremacy,
Yeah.
being at the top by yourself can be constraining. It can
Absolutely.
be restrictive. It can be lonely. It can be
Yeah.
frustrating. And so
Very.
having that support at all levels, of your career is going to be critical to survival. It's going to be critical to saving your sanity. It's going to be
Right,
critical to joy and loving
right.
what you do. Um,
And building that community, it really kind of goes against all common advice that we get about networking, right? You're supposed to network up. You're supposed to, this person has something that I need, or I need to talk to them. They're a big name. Building community really is about reaching across, right? It's about, okay, we have shared values. I want to get to know that person. I want to be in community with that person. um, we are working toward a similar goal. I want to be in. It's not about titles or hierarchy or who can do what for you. And when you build that kind of community, that's when you find yourself being spoken of highly when you're not around, right? So that kind of community is about. It's truly about community. It's not about cloud. It's not about click. It's not about who knows who knows what. And I think ultimately that's what's going to save us in this industry.
I completely agree. I really do. It's it's challenging, but
It
the
is.
beautiful thing about it is that we still succeed. You know what I mean? It's
Absolutely.
we still get to do big things. We still get to take matters in our own hands, and we don't always have to wait for permission because permission may never come. There was something that I heard recently, and it was something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, it was something along the lines of nobody believes in your potential more than the people who are trying to keep you down. Because if they didn't think you were going anywhere, there would be no reason to put barriers on you, you know what I mean? And to put obstacles
100%.
in your way. Um, so yeah, it's incredibly trying, but when you win, you really celebrate. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but when I was in elementary school and we had, the moving up ceremony, the little graduations, the kids would walk across the stage and there'd be somebody in the back with an air horn saying, "That's my baby." You know what I mean? And so, like, that's the way we need to show up for each other. Like, even if we feel like the award does not have our name on it, it's still like we all won. And that's the way we need to show up for each other. That's a large part of the community. And you know what? When it's your turn, those people in the back, they're going to be doing the same thing for you, and that's a beautiful thing. It's love, it's support, it's celebration. We don't always have to focus on the negativity and the obstacles and the frustration, because when we get to win, it's big and we should be so proud of it, you know?
Absolutely.
Which
And I
leads me
think
to
that,
ask you,
oh, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
I wanted to know what made you feel like an award winner before getting your award? And tell us about the award.
Yeah, so the award, and this was before I was on staff at Parents Magazine. It was 2021, so it was the Folio Awards. I don't know if you all are familiar with magazine awards, so the Eddie and Ozzie Awards. The 2021 Folio Award, and the project was anti-racist curriculum that won the award. So it was an editorial spotlight of, a package of stories, ultimately special project. Um, and again, I had never thought much about awards at that point. I never submitted myself for awards. It was not something that I, kind of set out for. But when different publications started reaching out to me to work on editorial projects, um, I realized I had created a demand for my perspective and my skill set, which honestly includes lived experience and background, right? Um, I could take studies, data, numbers, facts, and news and paint a picture and really show people why this mattered and show, why should we care? And also while putting a human face to these things. So again, when I won this Folio Award, I wasn't on staff at that time. I had been contracted by parents to come up with a cohesive package of stories that puts a different spin on Black history. So that package, anti-racist curriculum, it was reported stories basically on little known topics around Black history, and the framework was it was really a service to parents, caregivers, and educators on how to have these conversations with children and really how to not just rely on our education system to teach our children the truth about our nation's history. And I think what really made me feel like an award winner before this, even being awarded this award was seeing the bylines of the writers and the journalists on that package. And I say that because some of them, this was their first byline. I was the editor to give them their first byline. For some of them, it was their first byline in a national, major publication. And then, there were also a healthy number of veteran writers. Um, but at the end of the day, every single one of those writers trusted me with their work. And that's something that's always been really important to me. I don't think we stop and appreciate that enough as editors, is that we are collaborating with someone on something that they created and how precious our role is in that. So yeah, I would say what really made me feel like an award winner was just the amount of trust and respect that I had built up by doing things my way, right? Not waiting for permission, right? Not being scared to kind of carve out this space for the type of work that I wanted to do, which was very, I call it systems driven, right? Like I can take a look at, a tidbit of news and right away I can see the systems, the policies, everything that led up to this outcome. And ultimately, as a good editor, in journalism specifically, you need that kind of eye to be able to give a story the context and the space that it needs, and to make those quick decisions about what kind of context and space does it need? What kind of resources and time do we need to spend on this, right? So the bigger award for me in that is really knowing that outside of just community, I had earned respect for doing things my own way.
I love that. I love that so much. And hearing your story reminds me of, a similar one for myself. I was hired to create proprietary content for an educational company. And for that, I had to find and vet and manage about a dozen editors, or about a dozen writers to create this content, and it was around DEI. And so they were creating a collection that had, sort of an overview of a topic, so like Black Lives Matter, for example. And then we had to create different sort of supporting essays, almost explaining how, these questions relate to the bigger theme. And it was really a powerful thing for me to do because I had to find these writers, I had to vet these writers. And I'm really proud to say, I don't remember the exact percentage, but out of the dozen I had, about 80% of those writers were writers of color. And them writing their perspectives, it was it was a way to, you know, ensure the integrity and the validity of the content being created. Because I got to tell you, there was, I can't remember the exact topic, but let's say it was Black Lives Matter. One of the, I didn't get to choose all of the writers, the company chose some of them. And one of them happened to be a white intellectual property lawyer talking about Black Lives Matter. Like, that doesn't make any sense, you know? So, having the ability to be able to find the right people, to tell
Yeah.
the right stories, to be able to create a bullpen of underrepresented people. They were people of color, they were people with disabilities. At least one person was trans. It was, such a beautiful thing. And that was one of the toughest projects I ever had, but it was one of the most rewarding because
Yeah.
I got to help lift people up and they got paid. So,
That part.
having a check at the end of that is not the worst thing in the world.
Not at all.
So, my next question for you, um, can you tell us about VP Chicago and why you started it?
I can. So, the VP Chicago is currently in pre-launch or the community listening phase, rather. And I say we, but right now it's just me. Um, we are an independent news organization, really answering the call from my community for more actionable, solutions-oriented news that centers the most disinvested neighborhoods in our communities in Chicago. I don't know how familiar everybody is with Chicago, but it is a very big and very segregated city, very segregated across neighborhoods. Um, and what we see play out in, let's say, the downtown area, right, is going to be very different than what plays out, on this, for example, the South Side neighborhood that I'm from. But at the core of everything that kind of goes on in Chicago systems wise, we can take a look at the neighborhoods that the city disinvests in the most. And we can not only sort of predict policy change, action, all of those things from what's happening in those neighborhoods, but it also serves as, or should serve as, the starting point for where we put our attention, right? So our reporting focuses on the factors that influence community outcomes, right? So health, income, education, housing, environmental conditions. We have so back to your why I started it, this is part of it. The news ecosystem in Chicago is very vast. It is not a news desert by any means. However, we do have, there's a huge focus on democracy and civic life, and in my expert opinion, not quite enough attention or resources in our news ecosystem being given to community outcomes. And I think right now we're in a moment where we we should be, if we're not already, reimagining journalism as a public service. Um, so it's part of the reason that I started the VP Chicago. Um, Probably the bigger part is I have a similar story to a lot of journalists and editors right now, where I was laid off end of last year from a staff role. Again, as a freelancer, sometimes you make a decision, now's the time for a staff role. And I did that for a couple of years, and then, boom, layoffs across the industry. Everybody's dealing with them. So I'm not an anomaly in that way. But something I'm not sure we do speak enough about is Black journalists have been hit the hardest. Um, the disparity has always been there. And anytime there are layoffs in the journalism industry, um, anecdotally, or you can look at the data, it's Black journalists and other journalists of color that are most heavily targeted with those layoffs, or most impacted by those layoffs, I should say. So I took that layoff as an opportunity to really reevaluate what I wanted to be doing. I took the staff role because I wanted a sense of stability, a sense of security, and it was a reminder that staff roles do not necessarily offer stability or security. I think it's kind of a false comfort that we give ourselves in those roles. Um, but also, as many of you know, freelance was also drying up around the same time, right? So it was an opportunity for me to reflect on what I truly wanted to be doing, not just in my career, but for and in my community. So the idea for the VP Chicago was something that had been existing in the background for a long time. I've always known um, I wanted to start my own news organization because, quite frankly, there's just not enough Black-led news. Um, I also wanted to make sure that it it did not become something that people just wrote off as, um, you know, quote unquote audience specific or niche, but that it became a new framework for how we should do news. We should be centering the most marginalized, the most impacted in the work. And everybody should be a stakeholder in what happens in the most marginalized, most underrepresented, most disinvested communities. So that was my hope for the VP Chicago. And um, as much as I started it as yet another pivot and the biggest pivot in my career, I also strongly, strongly believe in the necessity of it. I think, right, like, again, we are in a pivotal turning point in journalism where people are clearly telling us what they want and what they don't want. Um, every other week, there's a study or a survey data comes out telling us, oh, people don't trust the news anymore. People don't trust journalists. People are tired of hearing about the same issues over and over. So we get it, but we have to actually do something with it. Um, and so while a lot of organizations may be trying to or attempting to or have plans to make some of those things a reality in their organizations, the VP Chicago is designed from the outset to be solutions oriented, to not be reactive, but to be proactive, to stop and provide context. We're not going to be in a rush to, hop on the same breaking news everyone else is. Because again, I believe in collaboration over competition. And I think if we continue to compete for the eyes of the same audiences with the same information and the same stories, we are kind of just digging ourselves in a bigger hole. We're creating the news fatigue that we're then going to try to solve with more product and more technology, when really we've just got to listen to our communities we're trying to serve. So yeah, the VP Chicago is again, it's very pre-launch community, and I'm in community listening, which basically means I'm talking to people in the community. I did it on a larger scale, and I'm doing it on a more one-on-one scale. If any of you want to reach out and just kind of talk about what I'm doing, what you're doing, I do have an open inbox in that way. But yeah, again, it's the biggest pivot in my career, but I think it's the pivot that I most believe in to stick.
I love that so much. And, I love the fact that you're listening to the community and you are putting, what they're saying in context. That has got to be incredibly validating. And especially,
It is.
when you come from the same background as them, like it's like someone holding up the mirror at just the right angle so you see how beautiful you are,
Mhm.
not like a funhouse
I
mirror.
love
That would
that.
be creepy.
Not a creepy mirror, just
So, I know that you've been given some tough breaks, in your career, but it's like you're harnessing your power to manifest your dreams, and that is just such an inspiring and humbling and exciting thing to do. And
yeah.
you know what, there's going to be little girls and boys all over who want to be like you when they grow up, which is
Oh, I hope so.
amazing in and of itself. So, knowing where you've been, knowing where you are, and knowing where you're going, what do you feel your strengths are? Do you feel like you have a weakness, but how would you turn that into an opportunity And what do you think potentially could be holding you back? I know that's like a four-part
Mm.
question.
Yeah. My strengths. So, and again, not to harp on any of this, but I do strongly believe that we all can pull from our background and find our strength. The interesting thing is, I think a lot of us will find by looking at our background and looking at our now, what we formerly would have considered a weakness does grow into your strength when it's wielded correctly. So for me, um, I I grew up poor. I grew up housing insecure, food insecure. Um, my father was incarcerated. So I came to my work acutely aware of how systems and policy work to shape community outcomes and how that, trickles down into family, to individual, to child outcomes. So when I'm reporting for a community or creating an idea, I know what needs exploring. I know what context we need to give it. Um, I'll also go ahead and throw in being neurodivergent as a strength because I can look at anything and I can come up with a million questions that need answering. And that just makes me a good editor. That makes me a good strategist. So again, I think both of my strengths, and I consider them strengths not just because um, they help me better do my work, and I'm good at what I do, but I consider them strengths because they are part of me, right? They're not something that I necessarily learned so much as something that I inherited over time. And I think there is a difference. And as far as weaknesses, I do have a hard time separating myself from my work. Um, Someone's boss might consider that a strength. It's very much a weakness. And it is a weakness because we, if we're doing what we consider mission-driven work, or, maybe it's not even mission-driven, but maybe we're really passionate about the goal we're trying to reach or the outcome, that we're working toward. If we tie that, the outcome of whether we achieve that or reach that, if we tie that, our work into our own self-worth, we're going to go on the same roller coaster that our career does, right? Um, I've been on a million ups and downs throughout my career. Where one minute, I'm winning an award, one minute you know, I'm I'm feeling completely unneeded, made redundant, laid off, whatever the case. If I had, if I could better separate myself as a person, as Kelly, from me, my role at this company or as an editor, as a journalist, um, I could have spared myself a lot of anguish, right? And so if anything, that's the strongest weakness that I can admit to because it affects me in my work, right? Because when you get to a point where you let your validation come from your work and you stop believing in yourself as a person, you've now created a vicious cycle where you almost feel paralyzed. You almost cannot do your best work because you don't even believe that you do best work anymore, right? So, um, it's a fixable weakness, and I also think it's a common weakness, but I think it's a weakness we don't talk about enough because I think it is glamorized, unfortunately. Um, your other part, Ebony, if you want to remind me, because there were about 8 parts in
I know I'm extra. Um, what opportunities do you see for the VP Chicago, and do you see any threats? I have an idea for threat,
Yeah.
but I want to hear what you think.
Yeah. Again, right now, people, so as far as opportunity, again, people are telling us what they want. Um, I have an opportunity to listen. I have an opportunity to, which is why I kind of haven't just jumped yet into producing content. Um, because I'm not making any moves that are not going to serve the communities I say I'm serving. Right. So it's an opportunity for me because again, every week there's new data, there's new survey data that's out. Um, this percent of people from this audience don't want this, they do want this, they're asking for this. And I'm in a position where I'm creating that. I'm from the outset setting out to fill a gap. I know people want to move beyond information. People want people want to feel empowered, and I hate that word. People want to feel empowered to take action. People want to know what to do, how to navigate this system. We're asking people to, democracy, civic life, and that's great. But people have their immediate needs, their community needs they need taken care of first. Some people they may need you to draw the line between how does this thing that you say I should care about affect me? And the current news landscape isn't necessarily doing that because the current news landscape is developed with the already engaged newsreader in mind. So it's a huge opportunity for me to take everything that I've, sort of done in my career as an editor, as a journalist, and bring it back, like make it present in this moment where people are asking for the very things that I've always been committed to, and I can give it to them. And I can start building that trust because that's to me that we're also missing trust. Um, I can start building that trust by being a person in the community. There was a piece of data that came out that said some, and I don't remember that, but some large majority of people in the neighborhoods that the VP Chicago was covering, the South and West Sides, have never met a journalist. And like on the surface, that doesn't say a lot, but when you peel back the layers and you realize how much coverage is coming out of the South and West Sides, how much of it is deficit based, how much of it is about crime, but yet these the people who live there have no connections with journalists, have no ties with journalists, have never met a journalist. Um, it really just paints a picture of that kind of swoop in and swoop out. Um, and it says a lot about our news ecosystem when people in the communities that are most impacted by a lot of the issues that journalists in Chicago cover have I feel very much disconnected from journalists. Um, so again, that's a big opportunity. The threat, I think the threat is pretty clear. um, the threat would for me in doing this feels like potential resistance because there is a resistance to change. I think people, not I think, we know that people in any industry, but in this case, in the journalism industry, who benefit from the status quo, who benefit from keeping things the way that they have been, even when it's not working, um, they have every stake in resisting something different, something that could potentially serve as a new model, which is my hope for the VP Chicago as well, that could serve as a new model for how we do journalism with our communities instead of about them. They have every stake in resisting that sort of change to the industry. They have every stake in resisting BIPOC-led media becoming the norm, becoming the go-to, as opposed to, that's not for me, that's some audience focused thing. So resistance is the biggest threat. And that resistance also will show up in other ways. It may show up in funding, who gets funded, because the VP Chicago is operating as a nonprofit. Um, so yeah, resistance. And as you put it earlier, Ebony, journalism, I mean, in general, most industries, but in this case, an institution like journalism, um, very much is white supremacy culture is woven all throughout our industry. And we see it in small ways, we see it in big ways. Um, any 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 Black person who has sat in an editorial leadership position in a newsroom um, has felt it firsthand, which is different than seeing it, right? But even with that being the biggest threat, it's still it's still the perfect opportunity right now. And I don't know that that threat of resistance scares me. It exists, but I don't know that it scares me so much as motivates me.
That's incredible, and you're incredible. And
Thank
we are
you.
so happy to have you here. And before we get to the workshop portion, I think we have time for maybe two questions from participants. So if you've got a question or two, pop it in the chat, and then we'll get rolling on the workshop portion.
We had some discussion in chat as you guys were talking, just people echoing the ideas Kelly was pointing out and really reverberating with those thoughts. Um, I really liked what you said, Kelly, about reimagining journalism as a public service. That's a really cool idea that I wish was being talked about more.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think and just I think we're probably all on the same page with that too, but just um I think there's a lot of fear around that framing about journalism because again, traditionally journalists are supposed to be, Wizard of Oz, here's the information, here's the news, here's the thing, and we back out of it. But we've seen how irresponsible that actually is. And so when we allow ourselves to stop and slow down and think, what does my community, you can call it audience, but I'm calling it community, what does my community need in this moment? And make sure that you're serving that need. I think it's a little too easy to say this doesn't, that's not my role, but I think that's ultimately going to change. And I think when we're able to change, I think that may be one of the things that saves journalism.
Okay, before we move on to the workshop portion, I just wanted to read one beautiful comment from the chat, and it says, "So glad you're pointing out that gap between the big picture concepts like democracy and what people are facing in their day to day lives. How our lives are a part of the larger concept of democracy is so often missing and misunderstood." This has been wonderful. But now it's time for people to do their best to imagine themselves in the places that they'd like to go. So, just so you know, the recording will go off before the workshop starts. You'll have about 15 minutes to work independently and quietly. And I want you to get out a piece of paper and think about two main questions. What is your big, fantastic, audacious goal for yourself and your career? It can be anything that you want to achieve. It doesn't matter how unlikely it might seem to you. It doesn't matter how big it is. It's about you and what you want for yourself. The second part of that is I want you all to take a second to write down your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities for your success, and threats, as in what do you feel could prevent you from doing so. And it's not more about focusing on the barriers, it's about naming the thing, because you can't fight something that you can't name, you know what I mean? And so I want you all to think about that for the next 15 minutes. And Oliver has put those two questions in the chat if you need to be reminded. So take 15 minutes to work independently. We'll come back at around 12:31, and then we will share our big audacious goals and be inspired by one another and feel encouraged by the community that we're building together.
While we're doing the workshop, I'll be playing some soft music. Um, so feel free to enjoy that. And just if you could keep your mics muted so people can enjoy the quiet space.
Thank you. We'll see you in 15
I
minutes. Hi, everyone. We'll give you about 2 more minutes to wrap up.